"Sir, your costume is impressive, but this is first class." The flight attendant's voice dripped with disdain, blocking his path. Before him, a 40-year-old black colonel stood silent, his decorated uniform a testament to a life of service. The air inside Apex Air Flight 815 was a familiar blend of recycled chill and quiet anticipation. Passengers in the first-class cabin settled into their plush leather seats, the low hum of the aircraft a prelude to their journey from Chicago O'Hare. Colonel Marcus Thorne, 40 years old, stood for a moment in the aisle, his posture an unconscious ramrod of discipline. His dress blue uniform was immaculate, a constellation of ribbons above his left pocket, telling silent stories of service in places most people only saw on the news. In his hands, he held a crisply folded American flag and a set of official escort orders, the paper cool against his skin. He found his seat, 1A, and began to place his cover in the overhead bin when a voice, sharp and artificially sweet, cut through the cabin's calm. "Excuse me, sir." He turned. A flight attendant with a polished blonde bun and a name tag that read Tiffany stood with her arms crossed. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which scanned his uniform with a look that mingled disbelief with outright condescension. "This section is reserved for our premier passengers. I'm afraid economy is toward the back of the aircraft." Colonel Thorne maintained his composure, his expression unreadable. "I believe I'm in the right place," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone. He gestured to his seat. "I'm in 1A. Tiffany's smile tightened. "I'm sure you believe that, but we need to keep this aisle clear. If you don't have a first-class ticket, I'll have to ask you to move along." Her voice was pitched just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to take notice. A man in seat 3C, wearing trendy glasses and a designer hoodie, subtly angled his phone, its screen glowing with the telltale red icon of a live stream. He was a mid-level tech influencer, and his instincts told him this was content. The viewer count, initially a modest 27, began to tick upward. "Ma'am, I assure you, my ticket is for this seat," Colonel Thorne stated, reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket. He produced a printed boarding pass, the Apex Air logo, and first class, seat 1A, clearly visible. Tiffany took it from him, her manicured fingers barely grazing his. She glanced at it for less than a second before handing it back, her skepticism undiminished. "It's remarkable what people can print out at home these days," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I'll need to see a confirmation on my official device." She tapped a tablet attached to her wrist, her movements deliberately slow and theatrical. The tension in the cabin thickened. The elderly woman in 2B lowered her newspaper. The influencer in 3C whispered into his phone, "You guys seeing this? They're giving this soldier a hard time." Comments began to pop up on his stream. "Is she serious? That's a real uniform." Colonel Thorne's jaw tightened, a barely perceptible clench of muscle. Through the window, he could see the ground crew moving with practiced reverence around a flag-draped casket being prepared for loading. Specialist Anya Petrova. She was waiting. Her family was waiting. He didn't have time for this. "My confirmation should be in your system," he said, his voice still even, but now carrying a new weight. "Colonel Marcus Thorne, I am the military escort for the dignified transfer on this flight." Tiffany's eyes widened, not with understanding, but with a flicker of triumphant certainty. She saw his statement not as a clarification, but as an overplayed hand, a detail too dramatic to be true. It confirmed her initial prejudice. This man was a fraud, and she was the one smart enough to catch him. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial stage whisper that was, paradoxically, even more public. "A dignified transfer? Sir, try to use a tragedy to scam a free upgrade is not only dishonest, it's disgusting." She straightened up, turning slightly to address the other passengers, making them an audience to her judgment. "Don't worry, everyone. I'm handling it. We take security and fair enforcement very seriously at Apex Air." The influencer's viewer count jumped past 300. The comments were now a waterfall of outrage. Colonel Thorne stood frozen in the aisle, the folded flag in his hand suddenly feeling immensely heavy. He was not just a passenger being challenged. He was a guardian being obstructed, and the honor of a fallen soldier was being tarnished with every passing second of this public spectacle. The first domino had been pushed, and the entire, carefully constructed decorum of the flight was about to come crashing down. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Disgusting. The word echoed in the silent cabin, amplified by the focused stares of the other passengers. Colonel Thorne felt a slow burn of anger, an emotion he had trained for decades to master and control. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his gaze locked on Tiffany. "Ma'am, I'm not scamming anyone," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He reached into his jacket pocket again, this time producing a wallet. He flipped it open to reveal his Department of Defense identification card. The photo showed a younger Thorne, but the name, rank, and credentials were all there, clear and official under the cabin's LED lighting. "This is my military ID. Colonel Marcus Thorne, United States Army." He held it out for her to inspect. Tiffany leaned forward, squinting at the card as if it were a complex puzzle. She didn't take it. Her eyes darted from the photo to his face, then to the ribbons on his chest. "Anyone can get a fake ID," she declared, her confidence bolstered by her own narrative. She gestured toward his uniform. "And those ribbons? I'm sure you can buy those online. People create elaborate costumes all the time. We had a man try to board dressed as a pilot last month. A second flight attendant, a young man named Leo with a kind, worried face, emerged from the galley, drawn by the escalating tension. "Tiffany, what's going on? We're almost ready to close the door. Just handling a little security issue, Leo," Tiffany said, not taking her eyes off Thorne. She waved a dismissive hand. "This gentleman is trying to occupy a first-class seat with some very questionable documentation." Leo looked from Tiffany's rigid posture to Colonel Thorne's stoic expression. He saw the uniform, the ribbons, the quiet dignity under fire, and his gut told him Tiffany was making a terrible mistake. "He looks legitimate, Tiff, and he's on a manifest for 1A. I checked." Tiffany shot him a withering glare. "The manifest can be hacked. I need to verify this myself. It's my responsibility as the lead flight attendant." She turned her back on Leo, a clear dismissal of his input. Her focus returned to Thorne, her tone hardening further. "Sir, if you cannot provide a verifiable confirmation of your purchase, I will have to call airport security to have you removed." The threat was now explicit. The influencer in 3C zoomed in on Colonel Thorne's face, whispering to his growing audience of over 700 viewers. "She's threatening to call security on him. This is insane. Share this stream, people." The hashtag Apex Air Disgrace started to appear in the comments. Colonel Thorne's patience, a deep and vast reserve, was beginning to fray at the edges. "Ma'am, through that window is the casket of Specialist Anya Petrova," he said, his voice low and intense, forcing Tiffany to look. The ground crew was making the final preparations, their movements somber and precise. "She gave her life for this country. I am her official escort. My mission, authorized by the Department of Defense, is to deliver her home to her family with honor. Your actions are obstructing a federally mandated military operation." He used the official terminology deliberately, hoping the gravity of the words would penetrate her certainty. It had the opposite effect. "Oh, a federally mandated military operation." Tiffany scoffed, rolling her eyes. "The stories just get bigger and bigger. That's it. I'm done with this." She turned away from him and strode purposefully to the front of the cabin, picking up the internal communication handset. Her voice, now broadcast through the small speakers throughout the plane, was crisp and authoritative. "This is lead flight attendant Vance to the gate agent. We have a Code Bravo situation on board. A passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions and presenting fraudulent documents. We require immediate security assistance at the jet bridge for removal." A collective gasp went through the cabin. A Code Bravo was a security alert. It implied a threat. The influencer's phone buzzed with notifications. The viewer count exploded past 2,000. Leo stared at Tiffany, his face pale with disbelief. Colonel Thorne closed his eyes for a brief second. He had faced down enemy fire, navigated complex diplomatic missions, and delivered devastating news to grieving families. He had never, in his entire career, faced this kind of baseless, public humiliation. Tiffany hadn't just questioned his ticket. She had questioned his honor, his integrity, and the very legitimacy of his service. And by calling security, she had escalated this from a dispute into a formal confrontation, ensuring it could no longer be resolved quietly. The response to Tiffany's call was swift. Within a minute, the aircraft door, which had been on the verge of closing, swung fully open. Two figures appeared, framed by the bright lights of the terminal. A uniformed airport police officer and a young, nervous-looking gate agent. The officer, a man in his late 40s with the name Kowalski on his tag, had the weary eyes of a veteran. The gate agent, whose tag read Chloe, clutched a tablet to her chest like a shield. "Tiffany, what's the situation?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling slightly. Tiffany was in her element now, a commander directing her troops. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Colonel Thorne. "This individual boarded with what I believe are forged documents for a first-class seat. He's making outlandish claims about being a military escort and is refusing to move to the back of the plane or to board. He's a security risk." Officer Kowalski's eyes settled on Colonel Thorne. As a former Marine himself, he recognized the details instantly. The precise placement of the ribbons, the mirror shine on the low quarters, the unwavering stillness under scrutiny. Everything about the man screamed authentic. But protocol was protocol. A flight crew's request was not something he could ignore. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step out onto the jet bridge with me, so we can sort this out," Kowalski said, his tone professionally neutral, but his eyes held a hint of apology. Colonel Thorne gave a slow, deliberate nod. Arguing here, in the crowded cabin, was a losing battle. It would only further delay Specialist Petrova's journey home. He turned, and as he walked the few steps to the door, a palpable wave of sympathy and outrage followed him from the first-class passengers. Phones were now openly recording from several seats. The jet bridge felt cold and sterile after the tense warmth of the cabin. The hum of the airport was louder here. Chloe, the gate agent, looked at the documents Thorne presented, the boarding pass, the military ID, the escort orders. She was young and inexperienced, and Tiffany's absolute confidence had rattled her. "The documents, they look real," Chloe murmured, glancing nervously at Tiffany. "Of course they look real. That's the point of a forgery," Tiffany snapped, stepping onto the jet bridge to oversee the proceedings. "We need to call a supervisor. This requires a higher level of verification." The influencer in 3C had moved to the window, his phone pressed against the glass, capturing the entire scene. His live stream was now viral, with over 10,000 viewers. The hashtag Honor the Colonel was trending in Chicago. Comments poured in from veterans, military spouses, and outraged citizens. "That's a Bronze Star on his chest." "Apex Air, your employee is a national disgrace. Someone get his name. We need to help him." A supervisor, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Brenda, arrived a few minutes later, her face a mask of operational stress. "What's the delay on 815? We're about to lose our slot." Tiffany quickly recounted her version of the story, embellishing it with phrases like aggressive posture and refusal to cooperate. Brenda listened, her eyes flicking between Tiffany's animated telling and Colonel Thorne's silent, dignified form. She took the documents and examined them with a practiced eye. "Everything here matches the manifest," Brenda said, her brow furrowed. "The DoD confirmation for the dignified transfer is in our system." "Those systems can be compromised," Tiffany insisted, her voice rising. "He could have stolen this uniform. For all we know, he could be a threat. We have to be 100% sure. We can't risk the safety of this flight over a sob story." The mention of a threat gave Brenda pause. In a post-9/11 world, the mere suggestion of a security breach, however flimsy, had to be taken seriously. The potential liability was enormous. She made a decision. "Officer, I think we need to do a more thorough verification," Brenda said, siding with caution. She turned to Colonel Thorne, her tone firm. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remove your jacket." The request was a physical blow. It was a profound and calculated act of degradation. A soldier's dress uniform is a symbol of their identity, their sacrifices, their honor. To be asked to remove it for inspection on a public jet bridge, in front of recording phones and staring passengers, was the ultimate humiliation. Officer Kowalski flinched. He knew what that jacket meant. "Brenda, is that really necessary?" "Do it," Tiffany urged, her eyes gleaming. Colonel Thorne's gaze was like granite. He looked past them, through the jet bridge window, to the flag-draped casket on the tarmac. Anya Petrova had worn her uniform with pride. She had died in it. He would not dishonor her memory, or his own, with an outburst of anger. Slowly, deliberately, he began to unbutton his jacket. The metallic sound of the buttons sliding free echoed in the tense silence. He shrugged the jacket off, the weight of the metals and ribbons making the fabric heavy. He held it, folded neatly, in his arms. The act was so dignified, so controlled, that it made the demand itself seem even more obscene. He stood there in his white shirt, his military bearing undiminished, a silent monument to their escalating ignorance. The humiliation was complete. The jet bridge had become a stage, and Colonel Thorne was the unwilling star of a drama he hadn't written. He stood in his shirt sleeves, the decorated jacket held in his arms like a fallen standard. The air crackled with a mixture of shame and suspense. Officer Kowalski looked at the ground, unable to meet the colonel's eyes. Brenda, the supervisor, checked her watch, the operational pressures of a delayed flight warring with the scene she had just authorized. Only Tiffany seemed pleased, her expression one of vindicated authority. Inside the cockpit, Captain Eva Rostova's voice was tight with frustration. "Tower, Apex 815. We have a passenger verification issue on the ground. We need another 5 minutes." The reply from air traffic control was clipped and unforgiving. "Negative, Apex 815. You've had your 5. Your departure slot is gone. You're holding up traffic to London and Tokyo. Get back to us when you're ready. You'll be at the back of the line." Captain Rostova swore under her breath. A lost slot meant a minimum 2-hour delay, a cascade of misconnections, and a mountain of paperwork. She was a 25-year veteran pilot, a woman who had earned her command through skill and precision, and she hated nothing more than groundside chaos. She unbuckled her seatbelt. It was time to see what was so important that it was derailing her flight. On the jet bridge, the situation was deteriorating. The influencer's live stream, now peaking at over 25,000 viewers, had caught the attention of local news outlets. Guided by the viral hashtag, a news van from a local affiliate could be seen pulling up to the terminal, its satellite dish rising. The small incident was metastasizing into a media event. Brenda's radio crackled. "Supervisor, this is Terminal Ops. We're getting calls from media about a military discrimination incident on Flight 815. What's your status?" Brenda's face paled. "We are following security protocols," she stammered into the radio. She turned to Kowalski. "We need to move him. Take him to the security office for a full workup. Now." "Sir, you'll have to come with me," Kowalski said, his voice heavy with resignation. Colonel Thorne didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the window. He watched as the ground crew, following their own protocols for a delay, began to cover Specialist Petrova's casket with a sterile, gray protective tarp. The sight of the American flag disappearing under that drab sheet of plastic broke through his carefully constructed wall of control. It was a desecration, a final indignity for a soldier who deserved only honor. Her mother would be at the airport in San Diego, pacing. Her father, a retired master sergeant, would be checking the arrivals board, his heart a knot of grief and pride. Every minute of this circus was another minute of their agony, another minute their daughter lay on a cold tarmac instead of on her way home. He had followed their rules. He had answered their questions. He had endured their suspicion. He had allowed them to humiliate him, but he would not allow them to dishonor her. "No," he said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a gavel. Everyone froze. "What did you say?" Brenda asked, taken aback. "I said no," Colonel Thorne repeated, his eyes turning from the window to face them. The quiet composure was gone, replaced by an intensity that was chilling. I have given you my identification. I have given you my orders. I have complied with your insulting demands. My mission is to escort that fallen soldier home. I'm not leaving her side. Tiffany stepped forward, emboldened. You see, he's refusing to cooperate. Officer, you need to restrain him. But before Kowalski could react, Colonel Thorne reached for the one piece of equipment he had hoped he would not have to use. From a specialized pouch on his belt, he withdrew a sleek, black satellite phone. It was a piece of military-grade hardware, utterly unfamiliar in the civilian world of iPhones and Androids. He ignored their shocked faces and dialed a number from memory. The phone connected almost instantly, with no ringing tone, only a secure digital handshake. His voice, when he spoke, was transformed. It was the voice of a commander in the field, precise, clear, and imbued with absolute authority. General Wallace, this is Colonel Thorne. A pause. Sir, I have a situation at Chicago O'Hare. I am on a dignified transfer mission, and I am being obstructed by civilian airline personnel. They are refusing to recognize my authority and federal orders. He listened for a moment, his eyes never leaving Tiffany's stunned face. Yes, sir. The situation requires it. Another brief pause, his expression hardening into cold fury. I am formally requesting activation of Directive 9 Sierra. The name meant nothing to them, but the way he said it sent a ripple of fear through the group. It sounded less like a request and more like a launch code. On the other end of the line, a four-star general in a secure command center of the Pentagon set in motion a chain of events that would bring the full weight of the United States military to bear on Apex Air Flight 815. The tipping point had been reached. The phrase Directive 9 Sierra hung in the air on the jet bridge, an incantation of unknown power. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Tiffany managed a nervous smirk, ready to dismiss it as another bluff. Brenda glanced at Officer Kowalski, a silent question in her eyes. Then the world erupted. It started with Captain Rostova's personal cell phone, which she was holding as she stepped out of the cockpit to see what was causing the delay. It buzzed with a ferocity that startled her. The screen displayed a block number, but the text beneath it read, Pentagon Operations Center. Her blood ran cold. She answered, her voice barely a whisper. This is Captain Rostova. Captain, a woman's voice, crisp and powerful, replied. This is Brigadier General Miller from the DoD's Transportation Command. We are tracking a priority military operation on your aircraft, Flight 815. Our records show you are currently detaining a Pentagon director, Colonel Marcus Thorne, and obstructing a dignified transfer. Is this information accurate? Captain Rostova's face drained of all color. Ma'am, there was a verification issue. Captain, you have 60 seconds to rectify this issue, or I will be forced to report Apex Air for a federal breach of military transport protocols. Colonel Thorne operates with the full authority of the Secretary of Defense. Do you understand? Before Rostova could answer, Brenda's corporate radio exploded with a high-priority, all-channel page. Brenda, this is Edward Sterling. It was the voice of the Apex Air CEO. He wasn't shouting, but the icy fury in his tone was far more terrifying. What in God's name is happening on my aircraft in Chicago? My phone is being lit up by the Department of Defense, the FAA, and Senator Davenport's office. Fix it. Fix it now. Simultaneously, Officer Kowalski's police radio, which had been quiet, shrieked to life. It wasn't a local dispatch. It was a patch through from the TSA's National Operations Center in Virginia. All units at O'Hare, we have a Level 1 alert from the Department of Defense regarding interference with a military escort. A federal liaison is en route. Do not, I repeat, do not impede the military officer in any way. Stand down and assist. Every symbol of authority they possessed, the corporate radio, the police dispatch, the captain's command, was being overridden by a higher, unseen power. They were no longer in control. They were the subjects of an inquiry coming from the highest levels of government and their own corporation. The influencer in 3C was capturing it all, his hushed, breathless commentary narrating the chaos for an audience that had swelled to over 50,000. Oh my God. You guys. Every single one of their phones and radios is going off. The colonel made one call. One call. The Pentagon is lighting them up. This is unreal. The comment section was a frantic, unreadable blur of capital letters and exclamation points. Hashtag Directive 9 Sierra was now trending worldwide. Colonel Thorne stood calmly amidst the storm he had unleashed, his satellite phone still pressed to his ear. General, all relevant parties are being notified. Directive 9 Sierra is fully in effect. He listened. Understood, sir. The secretary has been briefed. Thank you. He ended the call and lowered the phone. The silence that followed was deafening. The three authority figures, Rostova, Brenda, and Kowalski, stared at him, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. They were seeing him for the first time, not as a passenger or a potential fraud, but as a man who could command the institutional fury of the United States government with a single phone call. Captain Rostova was the first to move. She strode toward Colonel Thorne. Her entire demeanor changed from frustrated commander to deferential subordinate. Colonel Thorne, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I'm Captain Eva Rostova. I want to offer my most profound and sincere apologies for this catastrophic misunderstanding. Please return to your seat. We will depart immediately. I will personally ensure you and Specialist Petrova are treated with the utmost honor. Brenda stumbled forward, her face ashen. Sir, on behalf of Apex Air Ground Operations, I am so sorry. We will be conducting an immediate review of our protocols. Officer Kowalski, looking deeply ashamed, simply removed his hat and held it over his chest. Colonel, my apologies, sir. There's no excuse. But Tiffany Vance, whose world had just been turned upside down, was not ready to surrender. Her identity was built on her authority within the narrow confines of an aluminum tube, and she couldn't process its sudden, total annihilation. The reverence her colleagues now showed Thorne felt like a betrayal. Wait just a minute, she shrieked, her voice cracking. The sound was jarring in the suddenly respectful silence. I don't care who he called. He could have a friend in the phone company. Airline security protocols are my responsibility, and his documents were not verifiable through our standard channels. Every eye on the jet bridge turned to her in stunned disbelief. It was like watching someone argue with a hurricane. She had not yet grasped the nature of the power she had provoked. The reversal was complete, but the final, devastating clarification was still to come. Colonel Thorne turned his head slowly, his gaze settling on Tiffany. The fire in his eyes had been replaced by a chilling calm, the quiet of a storm's eye. He had absorbed her insults, her suspicion, and her public humiliation. Now, he would give her the one thing she claimed to value, an education and protocol. Ms. Vance, he began, his voice even and measured, each word landing with precision. You speak of standard channels. Let me introduce you to a channel you are clearly unfamiliar with. He reached into his document folder, the same one she had dismissed, and withdrew a dark blue leather credential case. He flipped it open. Inside, under a protective laminate, was not a standard military ID, but a federal identification card. It bore the gleaming, embossed golden seal of the Department of Defense. His photo was there, but his title was what silenced the jet bridge for good. I am Colonel Marcus Thorne, Director of the Office of Military Family Affairs, reporting directly to the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness at the Pentagon. He stated, panning the credential case so everyone, including the cameras still rolling from the aircraft windows, could see. My office is responsible for the oversight of all dignified transfer operations for every fallen service member of the United States Armed Forces. Every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine who comes home to American soil does so under the authority of my department. The weight of that title settled over them. This wasn't just a colonel. This was the colonel. He was the living embodiment of the sacred promise the nation makes to its fallen. Every family that receive a knock on their door, he continued, his voice resonating with the gravity of his life's work. Every parent who loses a child, every spouse who loses their partner in service to this country, is supported by programs managed by my office. The casket on that tarmac is not cargo, Ms. Vance. It is my mission. It is my solemn duty. Tiffany's defiant expression began to crumble, replaced by a dawning horror. That could still be a fake, she whispered, the words lacking any conviction. Colonel Thorne didn't even bother to respond to that. Instead, he held up his satellite phone, the screen still lit. It showed his call log. 17 missed calls had come in during his brief conversation with the general. The contact list read like a who's who of national security. SecDef, CJCS, WHL office, HESC staff. The acronyms for the Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the White House Military Office, and the House Armed Services Committee were all there. You question my documentation, Thorne said, his voice dropping lower. Let's review the regulations you were supposed to be following. He didn't need to look anything up. The words were seared into his memory. Under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 108, which governs airline security, and Apex Air's own operations manual, page 1138, Section C, military escorts on a dignified transfer mission are granted priority status. Your manual explicitly states, and I quote, "Under no circumstances shall the credentials or authority of a duty-verified military escort be questioned by civilian airline staff. All personnel are to provide immediate and unconditional assistance." Captain Rostova's face went white. She knew that regulation. It was in the annual training modules, the ones most staff clicked through without reading carefully. Brenda was already frantically swiping through a digital manual on her tablet. She found the page. Her shoulders slumped as she read the exact words Colonel Thorne had just recited. He was right. It was all there in black and white. This authorization, Thorne continued, his eyes boring into Tiffany, supersedes all standard passenger verification protocols. It is a federal mandate. By obstructing my boarding, questioning my credentials, and delaying this flight, you didn't just violate company policy, Ms. Vance. You interfered with a federal operation. That is a felony. The word felony sucked the remaining air from the jet bridge. This had moved beyond a firing offense into the realm of criminal liability. I was just trying to protect my flight, Tiffany stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. No, Colonel Thorne corrected her, his voice devoid of sympathy. You were indulging a prejudice. You looked at a black man in a uniform, and your mind, steeped in its own arrogant assumptions, refused to believe he could possibly be what he was. You saw a costume, not a career. A fraud, not a field-grade officer. You were not protecting your flight. You were protecting your own bigotry. He let the accusation hang in the air, undeniable and devastating. The unveiling was complete. He had stripped away her flimsy justifications of protocol and security, laying bare the ugly truth of her motivations. Her authority was not just gone. It had been exposed as a hollow sham from the very beginning. The technical and legal dismantling of Tiffany's authority was absolute. But Colonel Thorne knew the true gravity of the situation wasn't found in regulations or federal statutes. It was in the human heart. It was in the casket waiting on the tarmac. He turned his gaze from Tiffany's shattered expression to the small crowd of officials, his voice softening slightly, but losing none of its intensity. "Let me tell you about the person you have been disrespecting for the last 30 minutes, he said. Her name was Specialist Anya Petrova. She was 23 years old. He paused, letting her age sink in. She was younger than Chloe, the gate agent. Younger than Leo, the other flight attendant. She wasn't from a wealthy family. She grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the daughter of Ukrainian immigrants who came to this country for a better life. She joined the army to be a combat medic because she wanted to save people. She believed in the promise of America enough to wear its uniform and defend it. The influencer's camera was steady, capturing every word. The live stream audience, now over 70,000, was silent, the usual frantic scroll of comments replaced by a somber stillness. 3 days ago, in a dusty village in northern Syria, her convoy was hit by an IED. In the chaos that followed, under enemy fire, Specialist Petrova ignored her own shrapnel wounds and ran to a burning vehicle to pull out 2 of her wounded comrades. After getting them to safety, she went back, She was killed by a sniper's bullet while trying to render aid to a wounded local child. He let the story settle, the raw heroism and senseless tragedy of it. She didn't die in a blaze of glory. She died in the dirt, trying to save a child she didn't know, thousands of miles from home. She was a daughter, a sister. She was engaged to be married next spring. His voice remained steady, a testament to the countless times he had performed this terrible duty. But for the first time, a flicker of deep emotion showed in his eyes. Right now, at San Diego International Airport, her mother and father are waiting. Her two younger sisters are with them. Her grandparents, who flew in from Pittsburgh, are there too. They are gathered in a small, quiet room, waiting for this airplane to land so they can see their daughter's casket, draped in the flag she died for, and begin the impossible process of saying goodbye. He looked directly at Tiffany, then at Brenda, then at Captain Rostova. Every minute you delayed this flight, every second you spent on this baseless interrogation was another minute of agony for that family. You weren't just disrespecting a uniform. You were pouring salt in the rawest of human wounds. You took a family's darkest day and made it worse, all for the sake of your own misplaced authority. The human cost, articulated so plainly, was more damning than any federal law. It reframed their actions from a procedural error to a moral crime. Captain Rostova's radio crackled again. It was the gate agent. "Captain, I have an urgent message from corporate. The vice president of operations is on a charter flight from Atlanta, ETA 2 hours. The CEO, Edward Sterling, is personally flying to O'Hare. His ETA is 3 hours." The news rippled through the group. This was no longer being handled by a regional director. The highest echelons of the company were converging on their location. The crisis had reached its peak. Colonel Thorne nodded slowly. The corporate response was expected, but his focus remained on the true mission. "Captain Rostova," he said, his voice regaining its command tone, "we have wasted enough of the Petrova family's time. Prepare your aircraft for immediate departure." He turned and walked back into the plane without a backward glance, leaving the stunned and broken figures on the jet bridge to contemplate the full, devastating human cost of their actions. As Colonel Thorne took his seat in 1A, a funereal silence fell over the first-class cabin. The passengers who had witnessed the confrontation now looked at him with a mixture of awe and reverence. The influencer in 3C ended his live stream with a final, whispered sign-off. He's back on board. Justice is coming. The stream had peaked at over 150,000 concurrent viewers and was now being ripped and re-uploaded across every social media platform. Captain Rostova, her face a grim mask, entered the cabin. She stopped at Thorne's row. "Colonel," she said quietly, "the CEO, Mr. Sterling, is on my personal cell phone. He's insisting on speaking with you." Thorne paused, then gave a curt nod. "Put him on speaker." Rostova held out the phone. A man's voice, strained but controlled, filled the quiet cabin. "Colonel Thorne, this is Edward Sterling. I'm the CEO of Apex Air. I'm calling to offer you my most profound, unreserved apology for the unconscionable treatment you and the memory of Specialist Petrova have endured today. Your apology is noted, Mr. Sterling," Thorne replied, his voice cold and clear. "But apologies are insufficient. I think it's important that you, your crew, and your passengers understand the full scope of what has occurred here." He pulled out his own secure tablet, the screen glowing with data he had preloaded. "Let's talk about the financial implications of Ms. Vance's actions. Apex Air currently holds exclusive government contracts for military personnel and family transport in the Midwest and Pacific regions. These contracts, according to the latest GSA filings, are valued at approximately $92 million annually. In the cockpit, the first officer was frantically typing into his own tablet, his eyes widening as he pulled up the same public records. The number was real. "These contracts," Thorne continued, his voice like a professor lecturing a failing student, "represent a significant portion of the DoD's domestic travel budget. They are contingent upon strict adherence to federal support protocols, the very protocols your staff violated today. A single, verified breach can trigger an immediate contract review and suspension by the Department of Defense. A pained noise came from the phone. "Colonel, I assure you, we will make this right. The damage is already done, Mr. Sterling," Thorne cut in. He swiped the screen on his tablet. This incident was broadcast live. The hashtag boycott Apex Air has been used over 250,000 times in the last hour. My office is monitoring a real-time data feed from military family social networks. They are organizing a coordinated cancellation of all Apex Air bookings. Can you guess what that looks like? He didn't wait for an answer. Your customer service lines are currently overwhelmed. Your website is experiencing a 700% increase in traffic to the cancel reservation page. Based on current velocity, my team projects a direct revenue loss of between $3 and $5 million by the end of the day. That number will grow exponentially as the story hits the national news cycle tonight. Captain Rostova felt sick. She could hear the frantic chatter from the gate agent's radio about mass cancellations. Furthermore, Mr. Sterling, let's discuss your stock price. Thorne swiped the screen again. A graph appeared showing Apex Air's stock, which had been stable all morning, suddenly taking a nosedive. It has dropped 4.2% in the last 45 minutes. That represents a loss of approximately $450 million in market capitalization. Your institutional investors and pension funds will be calling you shortly, if they haven't already. The silence on the phone was heavy. The number was staggering, almost incomprehensible. Tiffany Vance, who had been fired on the spot by Brenda and was now standing at the edge of the jet bridge waiting for a security escort, overheard the numbers. Her knees buckled. $500 million. She had vaporized $500 million of her company's value with her prejudice. "This is no longer about my personal treatment, Mr. Sterling," Thorne stated, his voice like ice. "This is a corporate crisis of your own making. This is a financial reckoning. You asked what you can do to make it right. The truth is, you can't undo the damage that has been done. You can only decide how you will mitigate the catastrophe to come." The CEO's voice, when it finally returned, was stripped of all pretense. It was the sound of a man staring into a financial abyss. "Colonel, tell me what you want." The CEO's question, "Tell me what you want," was the sound of total surrender. But Colonel Thorne wasn't interested in personal spoils. He was a strategist, and he saw a battlefield where he could win not just a single victory, but a lasting peace. "What I want, Mr. Sterling, is irrelevant," Thorne replied, his voice resonating through the silent first-class cabin. "What I require, on behalf of every military family that has ever been, or ever will be, a customer of your airline, is a choice. And you have 48 hours to make it." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense, as if he were speaking directly to the CEO face-to-face instead of through a phone. "You have two options. Option one is full corporate accountability. This is not just a press release and a donation. This is a top-to-bottom, public, and verifiable overhaul of your corporate culture." He began to list his terms, each one precise and non-negotiable. First, a public apology. Not a carefully worded statement from your PR department, but you, Mr. Sterling, on camera, looking the American people in the eye. You will acknowledge the systemic failures that led to this incident, and you will name the soldier your airline dishonored, Specialist Anya Petrova. Second, comprehensive retraining. Every single one of your 80,000 customer-facing employees, from gate agents to pilots, will undergo a new, mandatory military family sensitivity and protocol training program. This program will be designed and approved by my office at the Pentagon. Third, new policies. You will establish a permanent, zero-tolerance policy for discrimination against military personnel and their families. Violation will mean immediate termination. You will also create a dedicated military and Gold Star family customer service line, staffed 24/7 by specially trained agents. Fourth, a significant and sustained financial commitment. You will establish a charitable fund with an initial endowment of $5 million to support the families of fallen soldiers. This will be an ongoing commitment, not a one-time payment to make the problem go away. He paused, letting the weight of the demands sink in. On the other end of the line, the CEO was silent, the sound of frantic typing from his assistants audible in the background. That is option one, Thorne concluded. It will be painful. It will be expensive. It will be humiliating. But it offers you a path to redemption. He then delivered the alternative. Option two is simpler. You do nothing. You treat this as a standard PR crisis. You fire the flight attendant, issue a vague apology, and hope it all blows over. His voice hardened, and I, in turn, will unleash the full consequences. I will personally file a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation and the FAA, citing multiple violations of federal law. I will recommend the immediate suspension of our $92 million military transport contracts, pending a full federal investigation. I will accept the invitation I have already received from the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee to testify in a public, televised hearing about the systemic mistreatment of military families by the airline industry, with Apex Air as the prime example. I will personally brief the leaders of every major veterans organization, the American Legion, the VFW, the IAVA. These organizations represent millions of members and their families, and they will hear that Apex Air has declared itself hostile territory. Your brand will become synonymous with military disrespect. You will explain to your shareholders why you chose to lose billions in market value and future revenue, rather than treat America's heroes with dignity. He leaned back in his seat. The choice is yours, Mr. Sterling. Rebuild your company on a foundation of respect, or watch it crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. You have 48 hours. He didn't need to say another word. The ultimatum was absolute. It was a choice between controlled demolition and total annihilation. The businessman in 3C, who had restarted his stream the moment the CEO's call began, whispered to his now 200,000 viewers, he's not asking for a refund. He's demanding they change their entire company. This is legendary. The comments exploded. Give them hell, Colonel. Justice for Specialist Petrova. Apex better choose wisely. On the phone, the only sound was the ragged breathing of a CEO realizing that his career and his company's future now rested entirely in the hands of the man his employee had tried to throw off a plane for wearing a costume. The consequences began to cascade before Flight 815 even pushed back from the gate. On the jet bridge, a stone-faced corporate security officer handed Tiffany Vance a tablet. On the screen was a one-page document, her termination letter. The reason cited was not insubordination, but gross violation of federal anti-discrimination policies and willful disregard for established company protocols concerning military personnel. Her 15-year career with Apex Air was over. She signed the form with a trembling hand, a non-disclosure agreement thrust before her next. The viral videos, which had now been viewed a collective 2 million times, ensured her name and face were inextricably linked to the hashtag #ApexAirDisgrace. A simple Google search would haunt any future job application. Gate Supervisor Brenda and Captain Rostova were met by a grim-faced regional director who had raced to the airport. They were not fired, but suspended indefinitely, pending the completion of a newly mandated 80-hour military and veteran cultural competency course. Their careers were irrevocably tarnished. Officer Kowalski was placed on administrative leave by the airport police department. His actions, or lack thereof, now the subject of a formal internal affairs investigation. 6 hours later, in a sterile boardroom at Apex Air's Atlanta headquarters, CEO Edward Sterling stood before an emergency meeting of his board of directors. His usual tailored confidence was gone, replaced by the haggard look of a man in full crisis mode. On the massive screens that lined the wall, a dashboard of social media analytics painted a picture of pure corporate devastation. Military-affiliated cancellations are up over 600% since this morning. The chief operating officer reported, her voice flat. We've hemorrhaged an estimated $8 million in direct bookings in the last 6 hours alone. That number is projected to hit $20 million by morning. The stock stabilized after a 5.1% drop, but only after Mr. Sterling's emergency press release promising immediate and sweeping reforms. The CFO added, "The market is watching our next move. They want to see if we're serious." The The Pentagon's liaison office has been in constant contact, the company's general counsel said, rubbing his temples. They've been clear. The 48-hour deadline is not a negotiation. The Congressional Armed Services Committee has already scheduled a preliminary hearing for next week, titled A Review of Dignity in Transport for America's Heroes. Sterling projected Colonel Thorne's demands onto the main screen. The room was silent as the board members read the ultimatum. There was no debate. There was no discussion of alternatives. We're implementing every single one of his recommendations, Sterling announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. No exceptions, no delays. Our survival depends on it. The corporate machine, which had been moving with arrogant slowness just hours before, now kicked into high gear with breathtaking speed. A crisis response team worked through the night, fueled by coffee and fear. By sunrise, 24 hours after the incident, the transformation had begun. The Apex Air homepage was replaced with a single, somber portal, our commitment to military families. It featured dedicated customer service numbers, a new priority booking system, and links to support resources. Sterling's video apology, filmed against a plain background with no corporate logos, went live at 6 a.m. It was a masterclass in corporate contrition. Yesterday, Apex Airlines failed. He began, his voice heavy with emotion. We failed Colonel Marcus Thorne. We failed his mission. And we dishonored the memory and sacrifice of U.S. Army Specialist Anya Petrova. There are no excuses. We accept full and total responsibility, and we will spend every day from now on earning back the trust of the military community we so profoundly betrayed. The video garnered 5 million views in its first day. The company publicly announced the creation of the Specialist Anya Petrova Memorial Fund, with a $5 million endowment to provide scholarships for the children of fallen soldiers. 48 hours after the incident, the immediate aftermath was clear. Colonel Thorne had not just won a battle. He had dictated the terms of surrender. He had forced a corporate giant to its knees, not with anger or lawsuits, but with the quiet, unyielding pressure of principle. The company was beginning the painful, public process of rebuilding itself, and the architect of that reconstruction was a man they had dismissed as a fraud. The changes at Apex Air were not cosmetic. They were seismic, ripping through the company's culture and operations with the force of a revolution. Colonel Thorne's ultimatum became a foundational document, and the Thorne Protocol, as it was unofficially dubbed within the company, became the new gospel. The first and most visible change was the training. Within 90 days, every single one of Apex Air's 80,000 customer-facing employees was required to complete the new military and veteran cultural competency course. It wasn't a simple online module. It was an intensive 40-hour program designed in direct consultation with Colonel Thorne's office and a panel of Gold Star families. Employees learned to recognize military ranks and insignia, understand the unique stressors of military life, from deployments to PTSD, and, most critically, they learned the specific federally mandated protocols for a dignified transfer. The training culminated in a raw, emotional video featuring the parents of fallen soldiers describing what it feels like to wait for their child's casket to come home. There were reports of veteran pilots and seasoned flight attendants leaving the sessions in tears. Operationally, the changes were just as profound. A military family advisory board was established. It was composed of 12 military spouses, combat veterans, and Gold Star parents who were given direct, unfiltered access to the CEO and the board of directors. They met quarterly to review company policies and provide feedback. Their recommendations were not suggestions. They were treated as directives. A new app was developed for internal use, the Dignified Transfer Monitoring System. It allowed for real-time tracking of any flight carrying a fallen service member, with direct, encrypted communication links to the Pentagon's escort command and the receiving funeral home. It also provided a notification system for the family, so they could track their loved one's final journey with precision and dignity. The zero-tolerance policy was implemented with ruthless efficiency. In the 6 months following the incident, 17 employees across the network were terminated for infractions ranging from making dismissive comments about a soldier's disability to failing to offer priority boarding to a Gold Star family. The message was clear: the old way of doing things was gone forever. The ripple effect across the industry was immediate. Fearing their own apex moment, competitors scrambled to avoid similar incidents. Within a month, American Airlines and United had both announced enhanced military family policies and new training initiatives. Southwest Airlines, known for its customer service, created a dedicated military and veteran customer service team, modeled directly on the Apex Air program. The entire airline industry was forced to elevate its standard of care. 1 week after the incident, Colonel Thorne received a call from the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. "Colonel," the congressman said, "we've reviewed the initial reports from the Pentagon and the FAA, as well as the public response from Apex Air. It appears you've accomplished more in 48 hours than a congressional committee could in a year. We are officially canceling the oversight hearing. It seems it's no longer necessary." The victory was not just personal or corporate. It was systemic. Colonel Thorne had chosen education over litigation, transformation over punishment. He had filed no lawsuits and pursued no criminal charges. Instead, he had leveraged a moment of profound disrespect into a lasting, industry-wide shield of protection for every military family that would follow. Military Times, the leading independent publication for the armed forces, ran a cover story titled "The Thorne Protocol: How One Colonel's Dignity Remade an Industry." The Washington Post editorial board praised his strategic restraint and moral clarity. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs issued a formal statement commending his leadership in advancing the welfare of military families. The transformation was measurable. 30 days after the incident, Apex Air's internal military satisfaction scores, which had been a dismal 3.1 out of 5, jumped to 4.8. Military family bookings, after the initial catastrophic drop, returned to pre-incident levels within 3 weeks, and then began to climb as word of the new policies spread through the community. The stock price recovered fully and, buoyed by positive press and a renewed sense of corporate responsibility, gained 2% above its previous high. The systemic transformation was complete, proving that doing the right thing was not just a moral imperative, but a powerful business strategy. 1 year later, Colonel Marcus Thorne stood in his office at the Pentagon, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. He was reviewing the quarterly reports on military family travel experiences. The data told a story of a quiet revolution. Across all major U.S. airlines, reported incidents of discrimination or disrespect against military families had dropped by an astonishing 82%. The Thorne Protocol was now a standard case study in business schools across the nation, a lesson in crisis management and institutional accountability. On the corner of his desk, next to a photo of his own family, sat a small, framed, handwritten letter. It was from Anya Petrova's mother. "Colonel Thorne," it read, "because of your courage that day, my daughter's sacrifice was honored in a way that reached far beyond her service. You gave her dignity in death, and you gave our family, and so many others, hope that there are still leaders who fight for what is right. Thank you." But the true measure of his success wasn't in the corporate reports or the thank you letters. It was in the silence. It was in the phone calls that didn't come to his office anymore. The military spouses who traveled without being questioned about their ID cards. The disabled veterans who were offered pre-boarding without having to ask. The Gold Star families who were met at the gate by a specially trained agent who simply said, "We are here for you." The absence of complaint was the ultimate testament to the new standard of respect. The incident sparked more than just corporate change. It led to the drafting of new federal legislation. The Sergeant Rodriguez Military Family Protection Act, named in honor of the soldier in the original story that inspired this one, passed both houses of Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support. It codified many of the Thorne Protocol's requirements into federal law, ensuring that no service member's family would ever again have their grief compounded by humiliation. Colonel Thorne continued his work, still personally escorting fallen soldiers on their final journey home whenever his duties allowed. He became a sought-after speaker at airline industry conferences and corporate leadership seminars, where he shared powerful stories of military sacrifice, teaching executives that respect wasn't a line item on a budget, but the very foundation of a healthy organization. The enduring message of that day at O'Hare became a part of modern military lore. It was a story of how the most powerful response to injustice is often not a shout, but a quiet, unshakable confidence in one's own worth, backed by the institutional authority to create lasting change. It proved that one person, armed with principle and professionalism, could indeed bend the arc of a massive industry toward justice. These real-life stories demonstrate something profound about quiet strength, overcoming ignorance and prejudice. When you witness discrimination that seems impossible to fight, remember Colonel Thorne's approach. Know your rights, use the proper channels, and never, ever underestimate the power of one person speaking truth to institutional power with unwavering professional dignity. Have you ever witnessed an injustice, big or small, that left you feeling powerless? Share your story in the comments below. Please comment with respect for everyone's experiences. Sometimes, one person's courage to speak up can inspire an entire system to change. These touching stories need to be heard because they remind us that individual action can transform institutions. When we share these experiences, we build networks of support and accountability. Subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, overcoming injustice, and hit that notification bell, because these real-life accounts of courage and systemic change inspire all of us to stand up when it matters most. Together, we can ensure that dignity and respect aren't privileges to be earned, but rights to be protected for everyone.